Greetings and welcome to Codex Compliant.
Let's take a look at a particularly fabulous chapter of Space Marines.
I hit the lamp. When looking at the original Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader rulebook, you'll notice that the selection of Space Marine chapters in there is a little odd. As in, it places chapters like the Ultramarines on the same level of importance as the Flesh Eaters, the former having more books dedicated to them than I care to count, and the latter's lore for the last 38 years being mostly summarised by their name. Although, to be fair, in this first release we don't learn a huge amount about each chapter anyway, so it's not like it was obvious which ones would become more important. Hell, you don't really learn anything at all about most of them beyond their name and what they look like. They're just colour schemes for you to paint your dudes in.
Also, should be noted that although some of these chapters are first founding legions and some are from later foundings that were descended from those legions, that whole idea didn't really exist yet, so chapters like the Blood Angels and Blood Drinkers are not inherently linked by anything more than a predilection towards blood imagery and a penchant for amateur phlebotomy. It's also why you have the Crimson Fists here without any Imperial Fists. But in this list of chapters, one in particular stands out, because in the nearly 40 years since the book's original publication, they are the chapter listed in the book that's had the least written about them. The Rainbow Warriors.
But what exactly is the deal with these grimdark Care Bears? Well, we will now attempt to summarise everything we know about them from official sources, or at least everything about them we could find, which isn't much. Okay, so in the 1987 Rogue Trader rulebook, we're shown that they look like this, and that their colour scheme is listed as multicoloured. I suppose it's up to you whether you choose to interpret that to just mean that the helmet stripe is multicoloured, or that the blue parts can vary as well. Since if it is referring to the stripe, it's the only one on the list that does. Which does mean you can go wild with alternative interpretations and still technically stay fluff accurate. Although, to be fair, the few times that official full-colour representations of them have appeared, they use the mostly blue scheme. Also, the rainbow stripe being so important to their look means that they're one of the very few chapters who've kept the ubiquitous marine helmet stripes from Rogue Trader into later editions, which is quite fun. And I think it says a lot about how little we know about them, that this one illustration by Stephen Tappin from the rulebook of a rainbow warrior called Brother Vermilion being shot by a sororitas called Sister Sin is considered very important. To the point that fan canon often has nods to them coming into conflict with the wider Imperium in one way or another based on it. Yes, it is very useful that both of the people in this artwork chose to wear name tags to work that day. Oh, and there's also this little bit of artwork of some Rainbow Warriors getting absolutely annihilated. It's only a small thing, but when there's so little to work with, you've got to mention every little thing you find.
After that initial rulebook, they showed up here and there, and by that I mostly mean their icon showed up here and there, like on the Space Crusade board from 1990 alongside icons for all the other 1987 rulebook chapters. Which does mean that, despite the game actually containing Imperial Fists, the fist logo on the board would actually refer to the Crimson Fists. Then we couldn't really find anything official for a while, until their name showed up in White Dwarf 235 in 1999 in a list of known Marine chapters, and one also appeared in the Space Marine Collector's Guide from 2002. This guy also showed up on the GW website, although it looks like one of the ones they just photoshopped and didn't actually paint. A little later we did start to get some tiny snippets of actual information about them, like at least one Rainbow Warrior took part in the Gathrog Crusade, Captain Varagol to be specific. Although, since he was made up for the Dark Crusade campaign in 2006 by a store in Houston, Texas, I guess it's up to you to decide how hard you think that particular piece of canon is. In the 5th edition Space Marine Codex from 2008, we learned that their homeworld is called Prism, although we only know that because it shows their icon next to a world named Prism with record deleted written next to that. Prism would become fairly common to see in such maps going forward, and would even get mentioned in one of the Horus Heresy gamebooks as a place some Thousand Suns probably were at some point maybe. A few years later, in the 2012 audio drama Mission Purge by Gav Thorpe, take a shot, The Rainbow Warriors were offhandedly confirmed to be an Ultramarine successor during a conversation where a Space Wolf in a Deathwatch kill team is trying to figure out the origins of his Black Shield comrade, since, being a Black Shield, he doesn't bear his original chapter's icon.
Is it the Rainbow Warriors? I mean, I can understand why you would keep that a secret.
How so? The Rainbow Warriors are descended from the gene seed of Gilliman himself, as are the White Consuls. It is a heritage born with pride.
Yes, but the name...
We got something slightly more substantial in the 2013 6th edition Space Marine Codex. The Rainbow Warriors are said to have taken part in the Bloodstar campaign, where, alongside the Relictors and Firelords, they pushed back a demonic incursion, with all 3 chapters taking massive losses, including losing their chapter masters. Look, a single paragraph counts as substantial when we're talking about the Rainbow Warriors. We didn't have this one, so had to buy this whole book just to check that one paragraph really did actually say what the wiki said it said. Patreon.com/snipeandweb.
If you were wondering if they'd been referenced at all in more recent editions, well, both the Bloodstar campaign and Prism things both show up in the first 8th edition Marine Codex, although now Prism has a blank space where the Rainbow Warriors icon would be. And we also got the 2020 short story War in the Museum by Robert Rath, which seemed to suggest there might be some in Trazen the Infinites collection.
Space Marines in blue power armour stormed out, driving a wedge into the Tyranid advance. Trazen took them lower, and they saw strange plasma discharges. Sun-bright bolts dancing across the spectrum of colours, matching the vertical stripes on the Space Marines' helms. A captain raised a crystalline power sword that shimmered with the iridescence of an oil slick.
And yeah, that's about it as far as we can tell. They've been mentioned, or at least alluded to here and there, but we've also learned next to nothing about them. And the only thing that tells us they're probably still around at all is that Bloodstar campaign bit, since that happened in 748 M41, which is around the time of things like the Damocles Crusade and the First Tyrannic War, so it's relatively recent as far as 40k's timeline goes. Although, granted, what that story mostly tells us is that the fight was so bad even their chapter master died. So what state they're in now is unknown. Possibly not great considering the record deleted thing on Prism. Although I suppose it is interesting that for a chapter so associated with the early days of 40k in the late 80s, the little concrete info we do have on them all comes from this side of the millennium. They've also had their icon stolen, since their winged lightning bolt symbol has also been used by another Blue Marine chapter, the Death Strike. They just put it in yellow rather than white. For a while we assumed the Death Strike were an attempt to rework the Rainbow Warriors into something GW actually wanted to use. And we are still not 100% convinced that that wasn't the original intention. But they have both appeared in the same books together, so it seems to be a case of an icon getting reused as they do from time to time. And yes, we do technically have more information about the Death Strike than we do for the Rainbow Warriors at this point, despite them first appearing over a decade later. They even show up on that map from the 5th edition Codex, properly labelled, which is how we know it's not another Rainbow Warrior thing. Also, like the Rainbow Warriors, the Death Strike are a modern chapter that still uses a helmet stripe, further deepening our suspicions that they were originally intended as a redo. Although, according to the 2002 book Insignia Astartes, rather than the stripes denoting rank, as they did in Rogue Trader, the Death Strike chapter uses them to signify which company they belong to. And since they're supposed to be a Codex-compliant chapter, that would mean that the ones we've seen with the yellow stripe are from the second company, for example. Actually, thinking on it, given how Rogue Trader helmet stripes worked, the Rainbow Warriors probably needed to use a bespoke system for them anyway, unless you wanted to paint rainbows that occasionally needed to look like this. Ugh. And hey, both this Death Strike and the Rainbow Warrior from the Collector's Guides are photoshopped from the exact same Marine, and that means absolutely nothing. Sometimes things just happen.
Lookalikes aside, with such cavernous holes left in the Rainbow Warrior backstory, combined with their memorable rainbow patterning, it was almost inevitable that the fandom would try and fill in the gaps. One attempt that's caught on enough to occasionally be mistaken for official is to give them a Mesoamerican theme, often featuring feathers, jaguar pelts, patterns on the armour, and the use of weapons like makoit. That's those wooden swords with the obsidian teeth. And, rather pleasantly for a bit of fan canon, with a bit of digging, you can actually pin down its exact origin point. And that origin point is a guy called Philip Sibbering, who came up with the idea of reinterpreting them as specifically Aztec themed, whilst in a discussion on the Black Library forums in 2006, mostly to get away from the actual place we get their name from, which we'll get to in a moment. For those wondering, this is the same Philip Sibbering who did the cover art for the Horus Heresy novel False Gods. I swear sometimes it feels like there's only about 50 people in the world. He would properly write up his interpretation of them for his website, where he's done a lot of this sort of thing, to flesh them out into something more complete, along with putting together this bit of art you've absolutely seen knocking around if you've ever looked into the Rainbow Warriors. He bypassed them having a somewhat silly sounding name by simply making it a translation of their actual name in their planet's native language, which would be translated as the Warriors from Beyond the Rainbow Bridge. It's all very Vilka Fenrika Karkaradon Astra. Or maybe their real name actually translates to the Strikes of Xolotl, Xolotl being their local god and a nod to the actual Aztec god Xolot, the god of fire and lightning. Both explanations are in there, Philip seemingly couldn't decide which he liked best. Also, I really tried to pronounce Xolot correctly there. I hope I got vaguely close.
This version of the chapter is mostly Codex compliant, but their first company is made up of mostly dead but not actually dead Marines who usually operate as a tactical command aboard their ships, but occasionally take to the battlefield in white-painted dreadnoughts. Their ninth company is also essentially a black ops / war crimes company who do stuff that even the Imperium thinks is a bit much. You know, this Imperium. This means they are viewed somewhat poorly by the Inquisition and Sisters of Battle. You see what we mean about that one image having a lot to answer for? The ninth company often wears older marks of armour, including Mark I Thunder Armour, which is certainly one way to find a use for all those old minis. And of course, many other people have used Philip's idea, or at least the aesthetics of it, to expand on them in their own ways. So it's not shocking that some people assume there's an official basis for this, even though there absolutely isn't. Outside of that, the Rainbow Warriors, perhaps unsurprisingly, have also occasionally been a nice canvas for people making Pride-themed Marines. So you might see them with various Pride flag colours mixed in with their regular rainbows, which is really cool. Just because the setting of Warhammer 40k is dystopian doesn't mean the community around it needs to be. Also, I'm just going to be blunt here, if people painting their Marines like this bothers you, grow up and get real problems. Although now feels like an apt time to play this out of context clip from Mission Purge that happens shortly after the Rainbow Warrior line from earlier.
Have you ever been kissed by another Space Marine, Sekor?
Not unless you shave off that awful beard, Harry. And not on the lips.
Now, as to why Games Workshop themselves have not really done anything with the Rainbow Warriors over the years, well, that probably comes down to one of a few reasons. Possibly a combination. The first being that the inspiration for them appears to be the flagship of the Greenpeace fleet, the Rainbow Warrior, which was sunk in 1985 at the port of Auckland in an act of state terrorism by the French government, killing one man, a photographer named Fernando Pereira. It's very possible that this event was what the Sister Sin / Brother Vermilion art is actually about, a rainbow warrior being shot by someone bearing a fleur-de-lis, a symbol with a strong association with France. As you can imagine, the sinking of the Rainbow Warrior was a fairly big deal, and there's been plenty of books, movies and documentaries made about the event if you want to learn what actually happened there. But it's possible that, upon reflection, GW didn't want to be so directly referencing a real-world event where someone was killed that was only a few years old at the time, and so focus their attention on the other chapters they had at their disposal. Also, it was pointed out to me by Craig Sniffin, who has a truly beautiful Rainbow Warriors army, by the way, just wow. The name of the ship itself was taken from the 1962 book Warriors of the Rainbow, which is a book that invents a fake Native American prophecy in order to push an evangelical Christian agenda. Something we in the business call not cool. Basically everything related to the real-world origins of their name is a little upsetting. There is also the possibility that the Rainbow Warriors were similar to the Squats in 2nd edition, where they just couldn't figure out an identity for them, so just didn't bother doing anything with them.
But, in truth, we think that the real reason that they haven't been seen much is probably simpler. That their name and colour scheme was probably considered just a bit too goofy for the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Especially as the setting morphed over the years into what it is now. I mean, we think if you're happy to have factions called things like the World Eaters or the Flesh Tearers, you've already surrendered any idea that you're going for subtlety, so you might as well have Rainbow Warriors. But we would also understand if they thought that they didn't fit their particular vision for the setting super well. Their reference in Mission Purge was entirely based around that their name is a little silly sounding for a Space Marine chapter after all. They probably also got real bored of 14-year-old children making tired gay jokes about them too.
Although it does have to be said that GW has been no stranger to reworking old silly sounding factions into ones that they feel fit the current setting more. The previously mentioned Karkarodons being a rework of the Space Sharks, for example, and with so little to work with outside of a colour scheme, the Rainbow Warriors could have been a vibrantly coloured blank canvas to project a new identity onto, just as many people within the fandom have done themselves. But if no one at GW with the permission to do so had the particular drive or vision to do anything with them, outside of a cheeky reference here and there, it's probably fine that there's something that players can do whatever they want with, rather than getting some half-arsed, more grim darkified version GW felt they had to make just because they were one of the original chapters. So I guess the point here is to have fun with the Rainbow Warriors, figure out your own interpretation for them and just go for it.
Because Games Workshop certainly haven't done much with them.
Howdy, hope you enjoyed the video and thank you for watching. If you did like it, then you know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, maybe give the bell a tickle if that does anything anymore, I don't know. If you'd like to help us buy more codices that we'll only need for a single paragraph, please consider supporting us over at patreon.com/snipeandwib, just like the lovely folks scrolling past have. Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention, since I didn't know where else to put this in the video, is that it's pretty fun how, because so few people have done much with the Rainbow Warriors, that those who do end up having massive impacts on how people interpret them. We not only see that with Philip Sibbering's Space Aztecs, but also Louise Sugden's very specific interpretation of their paint scheme with all the red bits with white stripes and rainbows on the legs, which has absolutely caught on and you see them everywhere now. And I just think that's kind of fun. Speaking of, thanks to her and to everyone who let us use images of their Rainbow Warriors in this video. It was most appreciated.